And so this might be a question for now or for later if you think it's more relevant for later, but if you think the concept of truth as participation might be a better sort of metaphor of a way of conceiving how these three hypostases could sort of interact or participate in each other.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a good connection. I mean, I think the idea of participation goes through some um, changes from Plato through Thomas Aquinas through um, the Romantics. Um, so, like, for Plato, participation means mimicking the original, or like the copy of the idea participates in, like, physical things participate in the ideal form,
Yeah.
and so there's a kind of derivative nature to it, and it's kind of representational. But then in Aquinas, you get a little bit more of a actually, our me and Jack's colleague Jake Sherman has written about this, the genealogy of participation. Um, Aquinas has more of an existential understanding, and in the way that being participates in all beings, and the way that the divine act is what allows anything else to exist. And then so there's this. It's not that different from Plato, but it's a little bit more embodied, I guess. Um, and then in Schelling and the Romantics, there's this more like expressive form of participation where the one way sense of like there being the idea or the divine that is not so much that the divine is participating in the created thing, but that the created thing is participating in the divine. And Schelling, you get much more of a sense of co-creation, where the division between creature and creation really breaks down. And it's that latter form of participation that I'm trying to lean into. And maybe there needs to be further mutations, but really it's wanting to understand truth in the sense that would be compatible with like what Deleuze is suggesting about the virtual and the actual, and not not thinking of actualization as a process whereby a possibility is realized in the old Platonic sense, like the bad Platonic sense. There's more going on in Plato than that, but instead recognizing that like all that the virtual does, like the virtual is always a process of actualization, and it's more like crystallization out of a super saturated fluid.
That runs through everything and is the kind of web of fabric that is hidden. Like almost he brings up this Heraclitean, like the hidden connection between everything. So the intellect is our access to the hidden web that connects everything. And I think that's really this like virtual, subtle, or you could say, what's the other term? Implicit, latent, these kinds of things.
And there's a lot of Gilbert Simondon going on in Deleuze's thought, and in this article that wasn't so much mentioned. But I think Deleuze is getting this from and Bergson, but yeah. So it's more like Deleuze, but I worry that the kind of truth that I'm trying to articulate wouldn't be as I'm not as happy with like Deleuze's nominalism, and I'm anti a certain kind of essentialism. But I feel like, how do we avoid ending up with moral relativism? How do we avoid form just being a matter of abstraction from particulars and having no role in this process of co-creation? It's like, yes, we're creating the forms just as much as the forms are creating us, but like I want form to have a little bit more ontological heft than I feel like Deleuze is willing to give us. But does that make sense?
Yeah.
What needs to shift to recover some sense of the good without regressing to the bad form of essentialism that I think Deleuze rightly wants to overcome? If we think about the sun as the principal analogy that Plato uses and Plotinus returns to, it's neat, first of all, that there's already this sort of secret heliocentrism in Pythagorean and Platonic philosophy, but they thought of the sun as the still center, not moving, just like the one is still. And now we know it's not still, it moves too. And that sense of relative motion, if even the sun, or the good in this analogy, I think suggests that we need to give sort of an evolutionary vector to this, so that it's not just a vertical ascent to the one anymore, or this asymptotic approach to a static sense of goodness, but that we're always in a process of becoming good, as it were. It's an evolutionary process, and it's not a attempt to return to what we've lost, or to climb a ladder out of the world, but to become more, whatever this is, more actualized.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to just, again, like you said, like change our attention or our comportment or our way of being, our style of being within the world, rather than escaping from it or something like that.
Right.